Hello and welcome to Rauta's opinion videos. Well, this is not so much an opinion as such, but more like a commentary or statement or just random ideas about a very topic that has been running through in our comment section recently. This is partially related to a recent AMA video and also some other opinion videos where comments became kind of a discussion, a sort of conversation, and people were actually asking me or each other things like why there are no anti-Muslim bans, anti-Islam bans, why it's all about Christianity and Christianity is weak and blah blah blah. So I thought I'd enlighten this idea a little bit, at least from my standpoint, both as a person, so it's a kind of an individual opinion, but also kind of related to what we have here in Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and etc. And well, I don't know if this can give you a little bit more information compared to what you have before or otherwise, but I hope to enlighten at least some individuals about this topic and maybe bring the conversation to a new set of rails, so to speak. So there's been debate about this idea that why it's so much about Christianity, why black metal is fighting this so-called teethless religion, when Christianity isn't exactly the big problem maker anymore. Now, in order to understand why Christianity plays so big role in black metal and well in general in any metal, I mean, even if you think like death metal bands, even like bands like Morbid Angel and such, Christianity has been kind of the main enemy, at least when it comes to religions and cults and whatnot. The reason is actually quite simple. I'll try to give you at first, the kind of a European standpoint, the at least Nordic countries standpoint actually. So bands like Bathory and such, King Diamond even, they are from Nordic countries, Denmark and Sweden. And these countries were basically conquered by Christians already hundreds of years ago. And meanwhile, these Nordic countries were not exactly highly, developed cultures in the past. I mean, considering like Southern Europe, think of places like Italy or Rome, and these countries or cultures, they had pagan ideologies. Like Norway is a classic example, well, Sweden as well, with Viking gods, Viking culture, and all that stuff. Well, in Finland also we had our own set of deities, mythical creatures and stories how world was created and all that stuff. So we had this kind of a pagan culture. So a set of religions, myths, beliefs, and so forth. Each country had their own in a way anyway, even though back then these kind of cultural ideas maybe were not that set by borders. Of course they're not nowadays either, but what I'm trying to say here is that when Christianity was like still doing its baby steps in different parts of the world, people had different kinds of ideas, how the world was given birth, how things got done, what kind of gods or powers people were like leaning to when they needed, like, say, I don't know, more rain for their crops, or maybe some power and hope in order to slay their enemies in a battle, maybe some luck in fertility, having family and whatnot, maybe get rid of diseases, etc., etc. You get the idea, I hope. And I mean, like every culture has had their own set of beliefs in gods and deities. Look at India; they have like hundreds of thousands of deities. Way more detailed level than I guess any other places. Then there are like Asian culture, which we're not that much about having this kind of a god, creator type. But nevertheless, all these myths, religions, beliefs, and whatnot. And then we have obviously Christianity, this kind of a Judaism type. And Islam is basically one root or one verse of the same root there is. And back then, back in the history called dates, Christianity was, spreading aggressively. Kind of the thing that Islam is doing more or less nowadays, and even back then. But we have to remember Islam is way younger thing than Christianity as such. And so we feel this kind of a heritage when it comes to Nordic countries. We have this heritage of these gods and deities and rituals and whatever. And when Christianity basically came and took over, it wasn't just, a friendly visit like, hey, we have this dude called Jesus, and that dude's father, who is just like, God, he lacks name. So this is something that kind of took, over forcefully. And people were basically given chance, get baptized or die. Simple as that. Sword on your neck, you can choose. You either die or you start believing, or at least you admit that you would, submit to this new God who was supposed to be friendly, think of Ten Commandments and all that stuff. And suddenly these were like forced, on people. And also many sacred places of these folklore and myths and gods and whatever were basically replaced, or, by Christian things, or just, destroyed, removed, whatever. And also these kind of sacred dates were kind of replaced with Christian ideas. Think of like Christmas. I mean, it's been the traditional day for, when the whole year is the darkest period. So suddenly, boom, it is this dude's Jesus birthday. How convenient. And if you look at history, there are other gods and, belief systems where exactly the same stories. If I remember correctly, Egyptians had pretty much similar stories related to Jesus having this birth, this shining star on the sky, and wise men bringing their gifts and whatnot. And if I remember also correctly, Babylonian or some in that direction anyway, kind of a Middle Eastern or whatever beliefs had some similarities with these stories. So they're kind of like more universal than just, Christianity's own thing. But suddenly these ideas are, being replaced. Coincidentally, one thing which we still have, at least in Sweden and Finland, I'm not sure about other countries, we still have that being a kind of a pagan day, is this midsummer holiday. That means we burn huge bonfires and everybody gets wasted, and probably lots of people are having wild random sex, and maybe kids are born that way. Well, I sure know that they are. But anyway, the point being that is this midsummer day kind of never got replaced, at least in Finland. But those other, holidays and sacred dates, well, more or less, they have been replaced by Christian equivalents. Now, when we talk about black metal, how is this related to that? Well, come on, because of these churches being burned instead of, burned? Yes, burned. Yes, I meant built. Oh, funny how unconscious works. So when these churches were, built upon these sacred places, and people were, kind of forced out of their beliefs and whatever, this, of course, reflected on later people, let's say modern people. And so when people got, interested in their own heritage, be it their own culture or, their own country or whatever that is, people having heritage, like local areas or, certain people like Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, Icelandic, So, of course, that was to be seen as number one. It's like basically some modern war. Think of like Vietnam War. It's not like communist Vietnamese people are the biggest fans of, American people for kind of obvious reasons. And this could be just, seen in different places. Even though the reasons for war might be different, like they often are, it's not like, people just, erase the past, erase the history from their minds, and suddenly they are all, forgiven and whatnot. But people are kind of, you know, celebrating, paying homage in a way to their ancestors, their heritage, their elders. So, in that respect, it's kind of no, big surprise that Christianity became the number one enemy for Nordic countries. And that being said, most, let's say, majority of the black metal bands have always been coming from Nordic countries, especially Sweden, Norway, Finland, and to some extent places like Denmark and Iceland as well. Of course, lots of other bands coming from, places like Germany, United States, and blah blah blah. But when you think what they have in common, and what they especially had in common in the 80s or 90s, it wasn't, Muslims attacking those places, en masse, not in big numbers anyway. Even though terrorism was, kind of a big thing, like in 80s, 70s, and all that stuff, even bigger than nowadays, if you look at the figures. But still, they were not that much of an kind of a cultural enemy, so to speak. I mean, immigration is kind of different thing, even though they are related. But it's not like, anti-Islam is like anti-immigration as such. People should have to understand that, being like I say racist is a different thing than nationalist. I mean, of course, people can be both. People can be national. People can be, nationalist. People can be racist, and they can be all that. Or then just pick one of those, or none of those. But these are differences. So, for example, when a band is like, let's say, anti-Islam, some people see that as a kind of a racist thing. It's bigotry and whatnot. When it's actually exactly the same thing when a band is a anti-Christian or anti-Buddhism or whatever. But the thing is, for example, Buddhism is not a typical enemy for, let's say, secular people or European people. And why? Because Buddhists never caused any trouble here. It's like comparing alcohol and weed. If you wanna use a something in comparison. I mean, nobody ever basically was enjoying weed and started a killing spree or murder his best buddy because he was like so high. But people under influence of alcohol have been doing that a lot. I mean, like multiple times. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons when people in, like, let's say in Finland kill each other. Two guys go in a summer cabin and some fight stirs up, and because they're drunk, it kind of gets overboard, and next day the other guy is like wondering, what happened to the other guy? Oh, he's dead. Who stabbed him? I did. What the hell? But Buddhism in this comparison is the weed. Nothing basically bad ever happened because of Buddhism. Of course, I know they're radical in every religion, and I'm not, trying to save anybody from this rant or, not to point, fingers. But I mean, it's kind of clear. Christianity and Islam has caused way more trouble, death, and destruction, radicals or not, than say Buddhism or I don't know, Taoist people. So obviously, because of so much black metal was born in Christian countries, not only Nordic countries, not only even Europe, United States. United States is a Christian country. Look at the $1 bill or any other for that matter. In God we trust. Hello, if it says on the, on a dollar bill, that God is thing there. I mean, you have to make vows in, when you go to court. You have to make vows on a hand on a Bible or something. I mean, it kind of shows that government and law and all this is tied to religion. There, like a tight knot. It's not the same exactly in Europe, at least in all places. But in many places they are. I mean, Italian, Spanish, or those Catholic stages and places. I mean, it's something that is like bound, go hand in hand. I mean, people killing in like United Kingdom also. Religious people killing religious. I mean, look at the North Ireland and back in the days. Like people killing each other because they have a little bit different views. I mean, it's crazy. Then again, South America with its all, kind of first or second wave black metal bands. Also Christian countries. So when you actually do a little math and you pull down the figures, it's easy to see why, let's say, older black metal bands have this tradition about being anti-Christian, not so much anti-Islam or anti-other religion. Of course, there are many bands that are, in general, anti-religious or anti-theist, having religious with, gods and whatnot being the target there, and not so much about Buddhism and the like. But I mean, world is filled with all kind of religions. Even American Indians, natives, they had their own things, but they were more like, I don't know, nature related. So it's not like these kind of people, were creating problems for, I don't know, European people. I mean, they got some bad stuff happening. I mean, kind of a genocide thing in the American history, but it's not like these American Indians are having black metal bands and then being like anti-white. I don't know, and not least in big numbers. And of course, we can always debate that there are no anti-Islam bands in big numbers because in Islamic countries, it's not very typical to have metal bands because it might be, first of all, totally illegal. It might cause a death penalty, or maybe it's also that those kind of culture are not that much into metal in the first place. It's kind of a Western thing. I mean, even in huge countries, say China, it's not like metal ever was a huge phenomenon. In Japan, then again, there's solid metal culture. We've been getting a lot of Japanese bands, but then again, not as much as so many European countries. I mean, just look at the sheer numbers, in Finland and Sweden, the amount of metal bands compared to the amount of people there, it's, in totally different universe than, let's say, in Japan, not to mention China and India. So, I mean, like those 1 billion plus countries, they have bands, surely, but hardly as much as Nordic countries, and yet they are like 200 times the size. I mean, India is what, 1 billion plus, Finland 5 million, and we probably have dozens more bands than India ever has, or China for that matter. And even though Japan is not like this 1 billion plus country, still it has a lot of people, but it's not like it's United States of America, which then again has a lot of people. So there are reasons that some cultures produce more, metal music, more rock music. I'm not claiming it's kind of a Western thing as such, but clearly having American tradition and, blues and whatnot, soul music or bluegrass and all that stuff, that, was inspiring rock. And yet again, that was inspiring to do heavy metal. So think like bands like Venom starting in, United Kingdom in the 70s. I mean, maybe as such it wasn't like totally a Christian thing as, the prime motor. But it was clear that, when you look at the other bands that were basically doing the first wave of black metal, Battery, Hellhammer / Celtic Frost, King Diamond, and, Venom, I mean, it's not like they have different enemies. They have these different, devils in their music. But on the contrary, they have kind of like common thing, even though each of these bands come from different countries. And other bands that came in the 80s, later whatnot, they also have Christianity kind of like as a target. And there is a reason. You read Bible or you take a look what Christian people have been doing in the past or still doing in the modern days. I mean, it's not a surprise why that is annoying so many people. I mean, your neighbor could be outside a good Christian, and then again, he's a total dipshit douchebag, who is not even following the Ten Commandments. And of course, that will influence people. I mean, United States has a huge area called the Bible Belt. Of course, that places like that is, inspiring people to be, say, anti-Christian rather than anti-Islam or anti-Buddhist or anti-Hindu or. So I hope that this over lengthy video gives you some insight to reasons why Christianity has been the moving factor for black metal in so many places, not only Nordic countries, not only Europe, not only United States, but basically all over. So maybe you just need to take a history lesson if this was really enlightening stuff. And if you already knew this, you probably weren't not one of the persons, taking those comments. Why is not black metal attacking this and that religion? Who knows? Well, Rauta's rant out. I'm looking forward to your angry or happy or ignorant comments in the box below. Click upvote if you think I'm correct here and agree what I have to say, or dislike if you are just annoyed with what I just said and disagree forcefully or whatever. Anyway, bedtime for me, video time for you. See you soon with more video. Rauta out.